Hey, what's up, guys? Welcome to the channel. I am Comic Lorian, and I'm gonna be doing the comic review, or rather the graphic novel review of the Books of Magic. This is based in the DC universe, and if you're a DC universe fan, you know that there are many magic users in the DC universe, and there's a lot of argument as to who is the most powerful magic user in the DC universe. And to stop all debate, it's Tim Hunter. Tim Hunter is this young boy. I think in the book he's about 13, 14, comes from England, and he's supposed to be the most powerful magic user in the DC universe. But he doesn't even know that yet. He doesn't know that about himself. So there are a lot of people trying to kill him, a lot of people trying to basically sap his magic from him and all that. But you have these four people, right? You have John Constantine, the Phantom Stranger, Mr. E, and Dr. Occult. They all came together, and they all know that he can be a force for good or for evil, because magic is not like, it's not a moral thing, right? It can be for good or for evil. So you have, all these people, like what they're basically doing in this comic, they're basically taking him on a road trip, right? The magic school bus. And they're taking him around to see everything that the magic world has to offer, so that he can make a choice whether he wants to be in the magic world or he does not want to be in the magic world. Because the way the magic works, rather the magic system works in the DC universe, it's very, you have to believe in me. It's gonna sound like religious propaganda, but you have to believe in me for you to have access to me and all that. Yeah, sounds like a very particular religion. So yeah, you have to believe in it. And so what ends up happening, or rather what is going to happen in this book one, is that Tim Hunter is introduced to the magic world, right? He's basically giving like a tour, right? They're going to show him, rather in this book one, I believe it's the Phantom Stranger that's going to show him, or is it Dr. Occult? That's going to show him, like the beginning of the universe. If you're familiar with Constantine, oh my goodness, Lucifer. Yeah, I'm so sorry. Lucifer, Constantine, all that jazz, right? You're going to know, all this. There's going to be like, parts from all these other stories, how the universe started, how magic started, how Dr. Fate even started, how everything started in the DC universe. And I really like this comic. So, feel free to join me on this journey. Books of Magic, book 1 of 4, story by Neil Gaiman, art by Scott Hampton. So we open on an argument, right, between our four mystics, and Constantine obviously does not want anything to do with this plan. He doesn't want to go through with this, but the Phantom Stranger reminds him, telling him that they don't have a choice. And Dr. Occult adds in, telling them that, Timothy, that's to say Tim Hunter, can be a force for good, for evil, for magic, or for science, and they need him on the side of science, right? They want him on the side of science. They want him, more importantly, on their side. That's what they're hoping for. And Mr. E suggests they just kill him, because that's just Mr. E. That's what he's going to be suggesting. And he says they just kill Timothy because Timothy can be good or evil, and he doesn't want anything to do with evil. So before Tim even has the chance to make the choice for evil, just kill him, because that's all that Mr. E wants. And then we see Tim on his skateboard, obviously not having any idea that this conversation is ongoing. So Constantine basically suggests that they basically leave Tim alone, right? He says if he's going to become magical, he's going to do it on his own. He doesn't need them interfering in his life. But then Dr. Occult informs everyone that their enemies, the Cold Flame, who we're going to see more of later on in the comic, actually knows about Timothy, and they're still deliberating, they're still thinking of what to do. But then Mr. E accuses Dr. Occult of being a traitor, because how can he know what their enemies are planning if he's not a double agent? But then the Phantom Stranger cuts in and then reminds everyone how they need to enlighten their child, and that should be their mission, that should be their burden. So what ends up happening is the Phantom Stranger just asks everyone for their verbal consent, and Dr. Occult says okay, he's going to show him the far lands, basically the fairylands. Mr. E says he's going to take him to the end of time, and Constantine agrees to give him the grand tour of like all the magical people in the world. But then the Phantom Stranger also says he's going to take him to the beginning of time. Now this happens as we see them all get up to leave what I can assume to be the House of Mysteries, because that's the only place that this kind of conversation can be going on in. Assume, right? Allegedly, I'll say that. And, Constantine then sarcastically names their team, right? The Trenchcoat Brigade. He says, that's exactly what the world needs right now, right? The Trenchcoat Brigade. That's my British accent. So yeah, that's what he calls them. And Dr. Occult is very annoyed with this, because I guess, naming and calling names is a really big thing in this comic. So let's go on. So we cut back to Tim Hunter, where he begins to hear some tapping, and it only grows louder. And it seems to be coming from everywhere. And he's just like stopping in his tracks, trying to wonder, trying to figure out where it's all coming from. And suddenly, like a creep, Mr. E just appears behind Tim, puts a hand on his shoulder and is like, boy, do you believe in magic? Like a creep. And obviously Timothy just bails out, right? He runs out of there because who is this guy? He doesn't know this guy. He's just trying to get away from who he thinks is a creep or a pervert. And so while running, Tim comes into contact with the Phantom Stranger, who calls him by his full name and says, Tim Hunter, we just want to have a word with you. And Tim is obviously just freaked out, right? He keeps on running and then he runs into the Phantom Stranger. And so he just keeps on running, thinking to himself that he just has to get away from all these crazy people who just want something to do with him and he doesn't even know what they want. And he comes to a stop at what I can only assume to be fate is a magic store, right? He comes to a stop. We see Constantine, who is obviously the one lighting a cigarette, and he grabs Tim by the shoulder. And I tell you, the first thing Constantine says to this boy is, hey, you do not want to bite me. You do not want what I have flowing in my bloodstream in your mouth. That is for sure. Which, if you know anything about Constantine, you know that what he's saying is true. And then Constantine says, hey, I'm going to let go of your shirt now. The other guys and I, we just want to have a word with you. And Tim is obviously confused. He's asking, are you the cop? Are you the police? And Constantine is just like, nah, I'm just a private investigator. So Constantine lets him go. And just like that, every other person appears right in front of Timothy. So the Phantom Stranger asks again, do you believe in magic? And Tim sarcastically says, no, it doesn't exist. Until he thinks for a moment and says, yeah, I wish it did exist when I was younger. I wish it could make things weirder, better, more exciting. But, growing up, I realized that it does not exist. But the Phantom Stranger says, yeah, it actually does exist. And so what happens is Constantine introduces himself as Constantine and Tim introduces himself as Tim Hunter. But then Constantine corrects Tim, telling him that, hey, you shouldn't actually introduce yourself giving your real name, because if people know your real name, it can be used against you. And that's actually a recurring theme in the Sandman universe, in DC, in all of magic, right? If you know the real name of something, you can call that thing, you can invoke that thing, you can bend the will of that thing and make it work for you. So they tell Tim, hey, you can't tell anyone your real name. But then Tim turns to Dr. Occult and then asks, hey, what is your name? But then Dr. Occult says, aren't you listening? You're not supposed to ask for a name. You're supposed to ask what people are called. And that's when Dr. Occult says, I am called Dr. Occult. And so with the introductions out of the way and everyone essentially giving what is essentially their aliases, Tim just calls BS, right? He says, I don't believe it. I don't know what you guys are on. Is there a camera hidden somewhere? Am I being pranked? But what happens is Dr. Occult just takes his yo-yo that is in his hand, squeezes it together, and then goes poof. An owl comes out, right? He turns the yo-yo into an owl. And then Tim begins to believe somewhat. So Tim, finally starting to believe all this, thinks to himself that, yeah, he wants to be able to do this. He asked, can I be able to do this? Can I be able to turn, have this kind of power that you people have? And they say, yeah, if you walk the path that we are walking, that's the path of magic, you'll be able to do this and so much more. And so he thinks to himself that, yeah, I don't want people to walk all over me anymore. I don't want to be bullied anymore, like basically any 14-year-old would. And he says, yeah, he agrees to go with them. And what ends up happening is the Phantom Stranger just pulls out a portal, right? A door, a trans-dimensional door in the middle of the street. And, they walk right through it. So they arrive at a place of complete darkness, to Tim asking, where are we? But then the Phantom Stranger corrects him, saying, it's not where we are, but when we are. And he says, we are at a time before there was change, essentially before all of creation began. And at first, Tim begins to hear a sound. He says it sounds like someone who is screaming. But then the Phantom Stranger educates him and tells him, that's not the sound of screaming, that's the sound of birth. That's the sound of all life being birthed, which is essentially the creation of the universe. And yeah, that's the creation of everything. And though they are just observers there, the Phantom Stranger then tells Tim to look upward, which Tim does. And then he sees the stars clashing into themselves. And Tim is like, wow, this looks just like Star Wars. And the Phantom Stranger is like, yeah, that's a weird analogy, but that's actually very accurate, because that's the first war of the stars that's actually going on, the heavenly war. Which, if you know anything about the Judeo-Christian faith and the whole story of the first rebellion, how Lucifer rebelled in heaven and was cast out, and that's essentially what we're seeing. We're seeing the first war in heaven and Lucifer being cast out, as we are shown Lucifer being thrown out of heaven and falling to the earth. As Tim sees this, he just says, oh wow, bloody hell. And the Phantom Stranger is like, exactly. And then we are shown the archangels. We see Uriel, the one who rules over the worlds, Raphael, who oversees humanity, Michael, who is set over chaos, Saraguel, who is set over the spirits, Gabriel, who is lord over the cherubim and the seraphim, and Raguel, who is entrusted with the vengeance of the Lord. And yeah, they're just basically floating up there. As they go on, the Phantom Stranger then begins to educate him on the history of the world, as both the scientific and the magical, not as mutually exclusive things, two very different things, but the both are actually working hand in hand. So they walk towards a star that will essentially become Earth's sun, making a left using it as a landmark. But then they keep on moving, and the Phantom Stranger tells them, yes, the Earth was once a bunch of plasma that cooled down, but it was also a concave dish that was home to a lot of what you people would call, demons or demonic spirits, what he would call the pre-dead. Now, we are told that these pre-dead have long since passed away since the first life form crawled out of the ocean. But human beings still dream about them and still end up invoking them out of their plane and their time into our own plane and realm of existence, hence the summoning of demons. So the Phantom Stranger takes us to what we can at first assume, or what we all first think is Atlantis, but then he corrects, saying the main Atlantis has already been taken. The main capital has been taken. These are just the outlying archipelago islands that are being consumed by the sea. As we see an old man that turns to them, trying to tell them something, asking, "Hey boy, are you listening?" Obviously referring to Tim. And so Tim asks, "Can you see me?" But then the man says, "No, I can't see you. I can't even hear you. But my spell work has told me you're going to be here at this time." And the man goes on to say that, "I know that your time sees Atlantis as some great nation, some beautiful thing of magic, the height of magic." But then the man just says that it was nothing like that, right? It was just a symbol of magic, right? And everything is just a crock of dirt. So he's very nihilistic. And what the mage tries to say essentially is, it's not about the city of Atlantis, it's about what it represented, the art of magic. It's what lies inside rather of everyone. It's what lies inside of you and me. And then he goes on to say it is Leonese, it is Avalon, it is High Brazil. And then he talks about magic itself. And this old great mage describes magic as a crock of dirt, right? A golden crock of dirt, not worth the price he had paid for it. And he says, if I could go back, if I could have it all done again, I would never even choose the path of magic, right? Because it doesn't do anything essentially. It just packages nonsense as golden. His parting words to Tim are, don't take what they are offering you, right? It's not worth it. And the duo continues their journey as we see what is essentially caveman magic. And this caveman, he is appealing to what he believes to be the power behind what raises the sun, what makes the crops grow, what makes the great mastodon, which is actually a woolly mammoth or another form of woolly mammoth, breathe. And he feels that these powers, they are to be loved, sacrificed to, prayed to, and distrusted. Essentially, this is magic. Still going through history, we then see the land of Egypt, or rather from the Egyptians' perspective, where the deities emerge as gods. From the sands, you have the dog-faced gods. In what I can assume to be the Chinese religion, we see a land where dragons talk with lost souls. And then we even go on to the Greek side of things, where we see Dionysus, the god of wine and rebirth, is being born. And he's having a sort of party going on. And then we get some hint about Hecate. She is referred to here as the witch queen of three faces, who waits at the crossroads. So obviously it's Hecate. And we then get the word abracadabra, abraxas, magic. And that is basically the beginning of magic through history. But back to Tim, right? He's being shown all this too much, too fast, and he complains that it's too much, too fast. And he's basically having what can be described as motion sickness, basically motion sickness of the time-traveling variant, right? And he just bends over and he vomits. So the Phantom Stranger apologizes, with Tim asking, isn't there at least one person who we can talk to? And the Phantom Stranger says, you know what? I think there is. And he takes Tim towards England. And more specifically, the Phantom Stranger takes Tim to old-timey England, right? Because he says that the only person who has the power to see them, the only magician with the power to see them, is in that time. And as they arrive, they're instantly sensed by this boy who feels their presence and says, speak yourself, I know you're there, whatever spirit that you are. And he says, I command you, I command you. And instantly, Tim is like, hello. And the boy instantly sees Tim and is like, what manner of creature are you? And Tim responds, yeah, I'm Tim Hunter. But the boy instantly recognizes the Phantom Stranger, calling him the Borderless One. And we later find out the boy is called Merlin because Tim asks him, what are you called? Obviously taking his correction from the last time. And the boy introduces himself, they call me Merlin. Much to the surprise of Tim, who knows him, or rather has heard of him in the modern day world as an old man with a long beard. But Merlin says, yeah, that's going to be me, but in a whole lot of years from now. And Tim still asks, how can you see us? How do you have this power? And Merlin explains he's actually the child of two worlds, of the human world and the demon world. Now, see, Merlin, he's very nihilistic because he's talking about how he's going to help create Camelot, how he's going to help Arthur get on with all that sword in the stone business. But he's very nihilistic to the sense that he says it's going to happen, it's going to be glorious for a time, but then it's all going to come down crashing around us because of the mistake I will make. And what exactly is that mistake? And this mistake is Nimue, as he describes that she's gonna come and he's gonna basically simp after her. He describes himself like a dog in heat. He's gonna simp after her and he's gonna end up teaching her too much magic for her own good that she will use against him, and she will use his magic to keep him trapped in a cave, as we see him in a cave. Now, Merlin is telling all these things to Tim because he can see Tim, but someone else who can't see Tim, called Iason, enters the room as he's asking Merlin, calling him Mirrodin, who are you talking to? What are you doing? And he says, yeah, don't mind me, just focus on yourself. I'll give you something else to play with. Basically like a younger brother like an older brother shooing away the younger brother. And he turns to Tim and he says, yeah, this is all going to happen, but even though I know it's going to happen, I cannot stop it. And a fun fact is this person called Iason is later going to be known as Jason Blood. And so what exactly happens is Tim asks Merlin, you know what's about to happen. Isn't there anything you can do to change it? While in the novels, Merlin sort of works and says, you know what, there's something I can do, and begins to work on a sort of salvation plan for himself. But what happens in this comic is he says, I'm sorry, I must do as I will. Magic grants no freedoms. Friend, pupil, everything, it must be paid back for in full. Now, as the Phantom Stranger and Tim Hunter continue their time-traveling journey, Tim asks the Phantom Stranger, can I be as powerful as Merlin was? Now, the Phantom Stranger says, yeah, powerful is a strange word for you to use, but you essentially can, although there is no demon blood in your veins. Now, it's not telling us everything about the origin of Tim Hunter, but it's later on going to get to it in later books, right? But he says to him, you can be as powerful as you want to be. Now, Tim goes on to say, Merlin knew his life was not going to work out and he'd end up imprisoned in a cave, that it wouldn't be worth it, but he still did it anyways. And Tim then asks the Phantom Stranger, show me everything, I want to see more. And the Phantom Stranger does indeed show Tim more, as we see the Salem witch trials, which honestly, in real life, I believe to be less about religious fanaticism and more about the church trying to steal property from women at that time. But hey, I digress. But yeah, we see a lot of the things happening, a lot of the women being persecuted, and a lot of the women in one panel actually engaging in some witchcraft with some of these spirits that are being pulled from the other realm or plane of existence. But hey, that's their religious rights. But yeah, I digress. Now, Tim doesn't understand what he just saw, but the Phantom Stranger explains that people kill what they fear. He further explains that they burned, drowned, and hanged all those who they saw as witches, the devil's servants, those who were inquisitive about the world or even had the slightest scientific interest. The Phantom Stranger goes on to say that while in the forest and the high places and beside the great stones, the old religions endured. But Tim responds to this by going on to say, it doesn't seem like there's any real magic anymore, not like it was. And he asks, where did it all go? The Phantom Stranger says, much magic was lost when the last vestiges of Atlantis sank, although misplaced would perhaps be a more precise term. Between the Dark Ages and the Middle Ages, many of the powers of fairy and gramarye left this plane for good, some for one place, some for another. And as science arose, it left little room for magic. And now Tim asks why this is. The Phantom Stranger then explains that it's the difference in viewpoint. He goes on to say that science is a way of talking about the universe in words that bind it to a common reality, whereby magic is a method of talking to the universe in words that it cannot ignore. He then says the two are rarely compatible, to which Tim responds by saying, so what you're saying is magic died out by my time? No, the Phantom Stranger says, but wild magic is a thing of the past. And since there are those who would burn those who they perceive as witches, many true magicians adopted a new garb, avoiding recognition by disguising their plumage. I will show you some of them. As he tells Timothy of a man called Kent Nelson, also known as Dr. Fate, his helm called Naboo, which he found in a pyramid. He is a magician. He considers himself a hero. At night, the helmet murmurs to him, whispers the past, the whispers of a world of pure order, dead and still. As time goes on, the mask becomes the face, its destiny, maybe, or even fate. As they continue to walk through time, Tim asks what happened to him. The Phantom Stranger simply tells him his physical body passed away, that is the body of Kent Nelson, although the helm remains. As the duo arrive at a theater and take their seats, the Phantom Stranger tells Timothy a wise man once pointed out that the best place to hide a leaf is in the forest. Often, the best hiding place is in plain view. Now, the Phantom Stranger introduces Tim to Zatara, the father of Zatanna, the stage magician who Tim recognizes from Jonathan Ross on TV. As he says, theirs is a long lineage of enchantment, as he tells Tim to be quiet so they can listen to his life. Zatara, beginning his monologue, says, "Talking backwards, because time will not go backwards, because I will walk until I see an answer. Graffiti written backwards on the wall invisible, because I am getting ahead. Watch my dust. The fear of the unknown. We kill things we do not understand. Here, talk backwards, animate a dream. Here, talk backwards, glamour masks the fear. The thing, need to get ahead, the burning need. Watch my dust, my daughter, watch my dust. I need more than an illusion. We do it with mirrors and rabbits and doves. I retreated into safety, the world of illusion, in the stage, in the footlights, all eyes on me, and no one really seeing, because I do not talk backwards, because I do not say butterflies become night, and the night does not become butterflies. I give nothing of myself to the audience, as I do it with mirrors and string and sleight, the delusion of illusion, and the hand deceives the eye. My life is strobed like light by following a spot, and looking backwards I can only see the corpses of the animals and the birds who strutted with me on the darkened stage and helped me fool them all. Charms of birds and a hasteful of dead rabbits, they watch my dust. I take my last bow with pride, as proudly as befits a conjure man, going down in flames, up in smoke. With the monologue being over, we turn back and see a new person sitting beside Timothy, who immediately spooks Timothy as he says, "I have seen good, I have seen evil, and now I am dead." As he says, "Look upon my works," immediately spooking Timothy as he just gets up off his seat and asks, "Who is that?" The Phantom Stranger introduces him as John Sargent, saying he called himself Sargon the Sorcerer, and just like Kent Nelson, he became the possessor of a relic of great power. In this case, it was the Ruby of Life. And just like Zatara, he, who was a true magician, hid his magic behind trickery to amuse the masses. And just like Zatara as well, he died trying to protect good. And while his face and his whole body is melting, this Sargon the Sorcerer, in the most horrific way, turns to Tim and says, "You, listen, it's got a price. Magic, nothing's free," as he melts away, leaving behind the Ruby of Life. And so, the Phantom Stranger picks up the ruby and offers it to Tim, who declines it. The Phantom Stranger then tells Tim, "That's a good attitude that you have. Now you've begun to walk the path of knowledge." He adds, telling Tim, by the end of this path, he'll have the information he needs to decide what it is he wants to do. And so, with the tour coming to an end, they exit through a door labeled Egress. Ring any bells, anybody? Adventure Time fans, anyone? Anyway, as they exit through the door, the Phantom Stranger tells Tim that his journey has only just begun. And so they arrive back in England where they started, with John Constantine asking, "Hello, kid, how's the past?" As Tim tells him it was great, he learned a lot of stuff, and he actually threw up. Constantine then says, "Bloody hell, try not to puke on my raincoat. It's hell to dry clean. Right, just you and me then. I'm gonna take you around for a bit, introduce you to a few people. Oi, you wanna bring the owl along?" Tim Hunter does indeed bring his owl along, as Constantine goes on to say, "2 tickets for the grand tour, with yours truly as the guide. Makes you laugh, doesn't it?
the blonde leading the blind. Come on, Timothy Hunter. We've got a long way to go. As they leave, Mr. E then says, I still think we should kill him.
The Books of Magic, Book 2 of 5. Story by Neil Gaiman, art by Scott Hampton. Tim Hunter suddenly wakes up on a plane and he asks Constantine, where are we? Constantine says, on a plane. You know, those big metal things that fly in the air, although we have no luggage. But Tim is confused. How did we get here? You were saying something, and Constantine chimes in saying, I was saying I would introduce you to some of the people in the magical world, and it just happens to be some of them live in America, and that's where we are headed to. But Tim can't remember entering a plane, and he says, I don't even have a passport. Me neither, Constantine says as he gets up, as he says, I had one once, but I lost it. Been meaning to get one, but never really got around to it. Constantine says this while adjusting his tie getting up, as he says he wants to have a word with the female flight attendant up front, but as we all know, he's just gonna go bang. But as soon as Constantine leaves, the passenger beside Tim, who was previously sleeping, suddenly jolts awake, introducing himself as Boston Brand. And he goes on to say he was just talking to a dude who got killed trying to find out where Tim Hunter was. Tim Hunter asks him, are you mad? To which Boston replies, not that I'm aware of. Boston goes on to say that this guy was part of the Cold Flame, or was it the Blood Red Moon, or was it the Dark Circle? Well, it was one of those spook shows. As he tells Tim, they're trying to find out where you are, kiddo. Better take care of yourself. As we see Constantine coming back, Tim tells Boston, I don't know what you're talking about, and to be honest, I don't care. Famous last words, kiddo. That's what Boston says to him. Boston goes on to say mine were, see, from up here it almost looks like that guy's holding a rifle. But as Constantine sits down, he asks Tim, did anything interesting happen while I was gone? Nope, Tim replies. Fair enough, Constantine says, as we see a red-hot slap mark across his face. Their plane arrives in New York with Constantine walking so fast through the airport as Tim Hunter struggles to keep up with him, as Constantine tells Tim that growing up as a young boy, he always admired America because of all the things that he had seen about America. You know, the fire hydrant, the movies, and where all the superheroes were. Although he says he prefers to stay in a place that's old and quiet and where no one would dare wear a cape and Spanx, even if they could leap off tall buildings in a single bound. As they leave the airport, Tim is so confused as to how they did that because they never even got stopped once by any security or even the customs. Now, Constantine brushes this off as they get into a taxi as he tells the taxi driver to take them to Greenwich Village on Christie Street, to which Tim asks what's there, as Constantine tells him a really old friend who'd be so excited to see us. Now, we find out the old friend is called Madame Xanadu as we see her in her workspace, as she says, enter freely and unafraid. And just for her to find out that it's John Constantine, and she says, how dare you come in here, John, get out. Before John even has any time to explain, she's like, don't even try to flatter me, because he's trying to say, you're so beautiful, you look so good. And she just says, get the hell out. Don't think I've forgotten about the last time you were here, where you stole from me, and you stole what is called the winged egg. Now, Constantine tries to say, I'm sorry, he tries to explain himself, but she just says, I should tear you limb from limb. I should set harpies to soil your food and tear out your eyes, but I'm not gonna do that. I'm just gonna give you 10 seconds to leave. As Constantine turns to Tim, telling him, all right, mate, just hang outside, wait for me, I'll tell you when to come in. As we see Tim waiting outside, we see someone on the phone conversing, confirming Tim's location, as they say they can take care of him, in other words, kill him. So Constantine invites Tim back inside, with Madame Xanadu and Constantine having squashed their beef, as Madame Xanadu invites Tim to sit down, giving him a pack of cards, telling him to shuffle it, so she will read his future. And so Madame Xanadu reads the cards, which actually foreshadow what Tim is going to experience and tells us where he has come from. The first card tells us where he has come from. It's named the Hermit. It's one who observes but remains silent. A wise man's will. No, a wise man has already introduced him to secret knowledge. Someone terribly old who does not socialize. The second card tells us where you are right now, she says to Tim. It's called the Wheel of Fortune. Someone unreliable, a gambler, sees your opportunities when they are presented to you. Adventure comes to you, but also great danger. You are in great danger, Tim Hunter. The third card tells us where you're going. The Empress, strange, someone who understands or is in touch with your feminine side. A woman, possibly more than one woman, looms large. She guards something which she may yet give to you, a day world and a night world.
And finally, she says, the last card tells us where it all will take you. Justice reversed. Someone close to you. A decision to be made. The blind judge prepared to cut the baby in half. A time of great darkness. As she gets up, she tells Tim these cards might be people, conditions, or even time. It may be 4 men or 3 men and 1 woman, although she's not too sure. She tells him good luck and to beware of justice as she walks over to a shelf as she picks up a wooden owl. And she says, normally people give me gifts, but this time I'm gonna give you a gift. As she turns around, the owl, no longer a wooden figure, is now the real owl, Yo-Yo, Tim's pet, which he is happy to see. As they leave, Constantine asks if Corrigan and his other half are around, which Madame Xanadu says they are, and Constantine thanks her and says he'll go right up to see him. As Tim Hunter and Constantine make their way to see Corrigan, Constantine asks Tim what he thinks about the reading, but Tim is distracted. He's wondering what the wind's egg is and why Constantine stole it, but Constantine tells him he planned on returning it. It just broke. Now, Constantine tells Tim that it broke when he was having a fight with a troll in Birmingham, as Tim is surprised, obviously, to find out that Birmingham has trolls. But Constantine tells him, yeah, if you know where to look. As they discuss, we see the cab driver, who was actually an assassin sent to kill Tim, bring out a rifle from the boot of his car, as we see him positioning himself in the building, or rather in the doorway across from them, waiting to take aim. As they enter Corrigan's office, Constantine explains to Tim how Corrigan had died, but he came back, and he came back with something called the Spectre. As Constantine explains this, Corrigan himself walks in, asking how does Constantine know this information. Constantine introduces himself to Corrigan as he tells Corrigan that his other half, referring to the Spectre, knows Constantine. But Corrigan can't just get around the fact that they're English, as he finds it incredibly funny. Because as they talk, Corrigan can't help but poke fun at the English accent, and it's just a really funny scene. As Corrigan talks with Constantine and Tim Hunter asking about Tim's owl, we see the cab driver, who's also an assassin sent to kill Tim, take aim with his rifle at Tim, about to pull the trigger when just then the Spectre bursts out of Corrigan, or rather Corrigan turns into the Spectre. And what happens is the Spectre flies right out the window and flies straight to the assassin and hugs him, instantly turning him into some white stone statue of